What if a house could remember you before you ever stepped through its door? In the heart of the rural South, a middle-aged mechanic stumbles upon a 100-year-old abandoned mansion, listed for less than a used car. But the moment she crosses the threshold, strange things begin to happen. Creaking floors, hidden symbols, and a sealed room no one dared to open. When she finally unlocks it, she doesn't just uncover a secret, she uncovers herself. This is the true story of a woman who bought an abandoned mansion and discovered a buried legacy that had been waiting for her all along. Where are you watching from? We love seeing our global family in the comments. Grace Sullivan had grease beneath her fingernails, crow's feet at the corners of her eyes, and a heart that carried the weight of starting over at 48. For nearly 2 decades, she'd worked under hoods and beneath trucks, fixing what others deemed beyond repair. Her small garage on the outskirts of Portland wasn't glamorous, just four walls permeated by the scent of motor oil and the classic rock station that kept her company during long evenings alone. But it was hers. Every wrench in the well-worn toolbox, every burn scar on her forearms, every invoice with her name at the top, proof that she'd built something from nothing after David walked out 7 years ago, chasing Nashville dreams and leaving behind a wife and daughter who no longer fit his narrative. Her father Samuel had been her anchor through it all, teaching her how to rebuild an engine before she could drive, helping raise Emma when David left, bringing coffee and donuts every Sunday morning without fail. The heart attack took him on a Tuesday. No warning, no goodbye. Just the hollow sound of Emma sobbing when Grace told her that Grandpa wouldn't be coming on Sunday anymore. Samuel had always been mysterious about their family history, only saying they came from stronger roots than you know. His most prized possession was an old brass pocket watch with a five-pointed star engraved on its cover, a family heirloom he claimed went back generations. "This star protected our people," he'd say, though he never explained from what. Now, 3 months later, Grace sat in her father's old leather recliner, the one she couldn't bear to throw away. Portland's evening light filtered through dusty blinds as she scrolled through her laptop. The notice from her landlord sat on the coffee table. Rent increasing by 40% next month. Impossible. The school principal's email about Emma's college prep program waited in her inbox, another expense she couldn't afford. At 12, Emma was already dreaming of veterinary school. At 48, Grace was wondering how she'd make it to 50 with a roof over their heads. "Mom, are we going to be okay?" Emma had asked that morning, too perceptive for her age, her eyes, Samuel's eyes, searching Grace's face for the truth. "We always find a way, don't we?" Grace had replied, the false confidence in her voice not quite reaching her eyes. The property auction site was open on her laptop, a last desperate search for affordability somewhere. Anywhere. That's when she saw it. Willow Creek Estate, Oak Ridge, Georgia. A three-story antebellum mansion with columned portico, wraparound veranda, and windows like solemn eyes staring out from another century. The description read, "Historic Southern estate, 140 plus years old, needs complete renovation. Sold as is. Buyer assumes all risks." The starting bid was so low, Grace thought it was a mistake. Less than her 10-year-old Ford truck was worth. A small voice in her head, sounding remarkably like her father's, whispered, "Some things find you when you need them most." She zoomed in on the photos. Behind the decay and neglect was undeniable beauty. Hand-carved banisters, original hardwood floors, ceiling medallions crafted by artisans long dead. Through broken windows and missing roof tiles, southern sunlight spilled across rooms that had once witnessed history. "Mom, what are you looking at?" Emma's voice startled her. The girl stood in the doorway in her faded pajamas, hair wild from tossing in bed. "Just a house," Grace said, but couldn't help turning the screen toward her daughter. Emma's eyes widened. "It looks like a castle. Is it haunted?" Grace laughed for the first time in weeks. "Probably just full of raccoons and bad plumbing. We should buy it." Emma's certainty was absolute, the way only a 12-year-old's could be. We can't just move across the country on a whim, sweetie. Why not? What's keeping us here? The question hung in the air, unanswerable. What indeed? A failing business? A rented apartment they could no longer afford? Memories of Samuel that stabbed her heart on every street corner? Before she could talk herself out of it, Grace placed a bid. Low, absurdly low. A gesture more than anything. A way of pretending they had options. 3 days later, she received the email that would change everything. Congratulations! You are now the owner of Willow Creek Estate. Are you someone who believes in fresh starts or second chances? Have you ever taken a leap of faith when everything logical said not to? Share your story in the comments below. Grace spent the next 2 weeks in a blur of activity, selling the garage equipment, packing their meager belongings, explaining to bewildered friends why she was uprooting their lives for a broken-down mansion in a town she couldn't find on most maps. She kept only what would fit in her father's restored 1978 Ford pickup. Emma's clothes, books, and beloved telescope, her own tools and the quilt her grandmother had made, and Samuel's toolbox, the one he'd carried to every job since before Grace was born. The journey took 4 days in the old pickup. With each mile southward, the landscape transformed. Lush forests, sprawling farmland, small towns that appeared and vanished like memories. Emma cataloged license plates from different states, her excitement growing as Georgia drew closer. The truck's GPS lost signal as they approached Oak Ridge. Grace navigated the final stretch using a paper map purchased at a gas station, where the attendant had raised his eyebrows when she mentioned their destination. Willow Creek? Ain't nobody lived there since before my time. The town of Oak Ridge emerged like a postcard from the past. A main street lined with brick buildings, an old-fashioned diner with chrome fixtures, a courthouse with white columns, and a copper dome green by time. People moved unhurriedly along sidewalks, pausing to chat beneath the striped awnings. It was beautiful in a faded, forgotten way. They stopped at Eliza's cafe for lunch, the bell above the door announcing their arrival. Conversations dimmed as locals turned to study the strangers. Grace felt their stares like physical contact. Curious, assessing, perhaps wary. The woman behind the counter, silver-haired and straight-backed, approached with menus. "Welcome to Oak Ridge. Just passing through?" "Actually, we're moving here," Grace said, straightening her shoulders. "I'm Grace Sullivan. This is my daughter, Emma." The woman's eyes widened slightly, crow's feet deepening. "Eliza Monroe. This is my place." She glanced at their travel-worn clothes, the map clutched in Grace's hand. "Where are you settling?" "Willow Creek Estate," Emma answered proudly before Grace could speak. "We bought it." Silence rippled through the cafe. An elderly man at the counter set down his coffee cup with a sharp clink. Eliza studied Grace with new intensity. "That's so. Funny thing, feels like that old house has been waiting for someone." She smiled, but her eyes remained serious. "The cobbler pie's fresh today. On the house. Welcome to Oak Ridge." After lunch, they followed Eliza's directions down a narrow road that wound through oak trees draped with Spanish moss. The pavement eventually gave way to gravel, then to a dirt path nearly consumed by encroaching nature. Grace navigated the pickup carefully, the truck jolting over ruts and roots until they rounded a final bend. Emma gasped. Willow Creek materialized before them like a faded photograph come to life. 3 stories of weathered grandeur rose against the afternoon sky. Its white paint peeled to reveal silvered wood beneath. 6 columns supported a second-floor balcony, their bases disappearing into a tangle of overgrown azaleas and wisteria vines. Windows, some broken, some boarded, reflected the sunset like tired eyes. The roof sagged dangerously in one corner, and the wraparound porch listed like a ship taking on water. It was majestic and melancholy at once, a fallen queen still clinging to dignity. "It's perfect," Emma whispered. Grace wasn't so sure. Reality looked far more daunting than the auction photos had suggested, but they had nowhere else to go, and Samuel's voice seemed to whisper, "You've never backed down from a challenge, Gracie girl." They parked and approached slowly, crunching through leaves and fallen branches. At the bottom of the porch steps, Grace paused, a strange sensation washing over her. Not quite déjà vu, but something similar, a feeling of recognition, as though the house knew who she was. The wooden steps creaked beneath her boots as she climbed, Emma close behind. The front door was massive oak, its brass fixtures tarnished nearly black. The key, mailed from the auction company, felt unnaturally warm in Grace's palm. When she inserted it into the lock, the mechanism turned with surprising ease, as if recently oiled. The door swung inward with a groan that echoed through empty rooms. They stepped into a grand foyer. Dust motes danced in shafts of light that penetrated broken shutters. A sweeping staircase curved upward into shadow. Once elegant wallpaper curled from walls like peeling skin, revealing lath and plaster beneath. A crystal chandelier hung precariously from the ceiling, its facets dulled by decades of neglect. Emma sneezed. "It smells like Grandpa's attic." Grace nodded, mentally cataloging the 1,000 repairs needed before winter. "We'll open all the windows first thing tomorrow." They unrolled sleeping bags in what had once been a formal parlor, its fireplace intact though filled with bird nests. Grace set up a camp lantern between them, its glow creating a small island of comfort in the vastness of the house. That night, as Emma's breathing settled into sleep, Grace lay awake listening to the house's voice, the creaking timbers, the occasional scurrying of small creatures, the whisper of wind through broken window panes. Beneath these expected sounds was something else, a rhythm almost like breathing, as if the house itself were alive around them. A fanciful thought, born of exhaustion and stress, she told herself. Then she heard it, faint but distinct, a child's laughter, quickly silenced. Grace bolted upright, heart pounding. "Emma?" Her daughter slept peacefully, unmoved. The sound didn't repeat, but sleep eluded Grace until dawn painted the room in shades of gray and gold. As first light touched the walls, she noticed something she'd missed in the dimness of evening. Symbols carved into the wooden doorframe. Not decorative patterns, but deliberate marks, some like stars, others resembling knots or flowers. She ran her fingers over the shallow grooves, wondering what they meant, who had carved them, and why. They seemed old, worn smooth by time and countless hands. Later that morning, while Emma explored the overgrown garden, Grace examined the carvings more carefully. They appeared around every door and window, always on the threshold, always facing outward, like wards, like protection. Strangest of all was the realization that one symbol, a 5-pointed star inside a circle, matched exactly the design on her father's old brass pocket watch, the one he'd carried every day of his life, the one currently sitting in her jacket pocket. When she pulled it out to compare, the watch, which had stopped working the day Samuel died, ticked once in her palm. By the end of their first week in Oak Ridge, Grace and Emma had established a routine of sorts. Mornings were spent clearing debris and airing out rooms. Afternoons found Grace in town, gathering supplies and information, while Emma attended summer classes at the local school, a compromise to help her adjust before fall semester began. Clara Jenkins, the school principal, had been coolly professional when Grace enrolled Emma. "Willow Creek, you say?" she'd remarked, adjusting her glasses. "Interesting choice." Her tone suggested it was anything but interesting, perhaps foolish or suspicious instead. The residents of Oak Ridge maintained a polite distance, friendly in that uniquely southern way that revealed nothing while seeming to welcome everything. Only Eliza from the cafe showed genuine warmth, saving day-old pastries for them and offering local gossip like communion wine. "You met Joseph and Daniel at the hardware store yet?" Eliza asked one afternoon as Grace settled at the counter for coffee. 3 generations of Caldwells running that place. Daniel's been widowed 5 years now. Good man. Knows everything about restoring old houses. Grace recognized matchmaking when she heard it. I'm not looking for complications, Eliza. The older woman smiled knowingly. Didn't say you were, but a friend who understands joists and load-bearing walls might be useful. Wouldn't you say? When Grace finally met Daniel Caldwell, she understood Eliza's persistence. Tall and broad-shouldered, with silver threading his dark hair and laugh lines etched deeply around kind eyes, Daniel exuded the quiet confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. His hands were calloused from work, his advice offered without condescension. Willow Creek's got good bones, he told her after she described the sagging roof. Built to last, those old places. Just need someone who cares enough to bring them back. He offered to stop by and assess the structural issues. Grace hesitated before accepting, aware she couldn't afford professional help, but equally aware she was out of her depth with a project this size. Meanwhile, Emma had befriended Olivia, Eliza's granddaughter, who filled her head with local legends. Everyone knows Willow Creek is haunted, Olivia informed Emma over milkshakes. The Haywood family disappeared one night in 1919. No bodies ever found. People say you can hear them walking upstairs on full moons. Emma relayed this to Grace with more excitement than concern. Olivia says there's a hidden room where they kept their gold. If we find it, can we keep it? But within days, Emma had more than legends to share. I met Lily today, she announced over dinner, beans heated on a camp stove since the kitchen was still unusable. A new friend from school? Grace asked. Emma shook her head. No, she lives here. Well, she used to. She died a long time ago, but she still plays here. Grace's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Emma, I know what you're thinking, Mom. Emma sighed with the infinite patience of a child explaining the obvious. But she's real. She wears a blue dress with buttons down the back, and she knows things about the house nobody else could know. Like what? Like where they hid the real papers, and that her mother was Sarah, the cook, and that your family used to live here too. Grace felt a chill despite the summer heat. What did you say about my family? Lily says your grandma's grandma worked here. Her name was Eleanor, and she was brave. That night, while Emma slept soundly in the bedroom they'd cleared and cleaned, Grace sat on the porch swing they'd repaired that afternoon. Crickets sang in the darkness, fireflies pulsing like earthbound stars. The house loomed behind her, its windows reflecting moonlight. A soft scraping sound came from inside, too heavy for mice, too rhythmic for settling boards. Grace tensed, listening. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, crossing what had once been the dining room. She grabbed her flashlight and stepped inside, heart thudding against her ribs. The beam cut through darkness, illuminating empty rooms. The footsteps had ceased. Hello? Her voice sounded small in the vastness. Silence answered. She checked on Emma, still sleeping peacefully, before continuing her investigation. The dining room appeared undisturbed, dust undisturbed on the floor. But a door Grace was certain had been locked that evening now stood ajar, a thin ribbon of moonlight spilling from the crack. The library. They'd glimpsed it briefly during their initial exploration, but found the door swollen shut. Now it opened at her touch, hinges silent as if recently oiled. Bookshelves lined the walls, most empty though a few ancient volumes remained, their leather bindings cracked and faded. A massive desk dominated the center, its surface thick with dust, save for a single clear handprint, too small for an adult. Behind the desk stood a bookcase that seemed oddly proportioned compared to the others. Grace's contractor instincts tingled. She examined it closely, noting the slight gap between it and the wall, the subtle wear pattern on the floor before it. Not a bookcase, a door. She ran her fingers along the edges, searching for a latch or trigger mechanism. Finding nothing, she applied pressure to the side, expecting resistance. Instead, the bookcase swung inward with surprising ease, revealing a narrow passage beyond. Cold air rushed out, carrying the scent of earth and old paper. Grace's flashlight beam penetrated only a few feet before darkness swallowed it. Common sense urged retreat, waiting for daylight, for Daniel's promised visit, for any scenario safer than entering a hidden passage alone at night. But something pulled her forward, the same inexplicable feeling that had drawn her to this house from 3,000 miles away. The passage was brick-lined and curved gently, descending into earth. Her flashlight revealed cobwebs and mouse droppings, but no recent human footprints in the dust, until she reached the small chamber at the end. There the floor showed clear signs of disturbance. The room was circular, perhaps 15 feet across, its ceiling low enough that Grace had to stoop slightly. Wooden crates lined one wall. A table held what appeared to be accounting ledgers, their pages yellowed and brittle. But it was the trunk in the center that drew her attention. Leather-bound with brass fittings, its lid ajar as if someone had recently examined its contents. Grace knelt beside it, flashlight propped on a nearby crate. Inside lay bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon, small cloth pouches, and a stack of photographs, the old sepia kind, with white borders and formal poses. The topmost photo showed a group arranged on Willow Creek's front steps. A white family occupied the foreground, stern-faced man, elegant wife, 3 children in Sunday best. Behind them stood a row of black servants in uniform, men in dark suits, women in aprons and caps, faces carefully neutral. But one face made Grace's breath catch. A tall man with broad shoulders and sharp cheekbones stood at the end of the row. His eyes, even across a century of silver nitrate and paper, were unmistakable. Samuel's eyes, Emma's eyes, her eyes. With shaking hands, she turned the photo over, written in faded ink. Haywood family and staff, spring 1917. She rifled through other photos, finding the same man in several. In one, he stood beside a young woman near the servants' quarters, their posture suggesting intimacy despite the careful distance between them. Grace turned to the letters, unfolding one carefully. The handwriting was elegant, feminine. My dearest George, Master Haywood leaves for Atlanta tomorrow. We will have our chance to access the records. Eleanor has secured the key to the silent room. What we find there may change everything. Be careful, my love. So many eyes watching. Forever yours, Rose Rose. Eleanor, George, names without context, yet somehow familiar. Grace dug deeper into the trunk, finding a small leather-bound book, a diary, its pages filled with the same elegant handwriting as the letter. The inscription inside the cover read, Property of Eleanor Sullivan. Sullivan, her name, her family's name. The coincidence was too specific to be accident. With growing certainty, Grace understood she hadn't randomly found this house. She had returned to it. Have you ever discovered a family secret that changed how you saw yourself? How did it change you? Share your thoughts in the comments. Over the next days, Grace divided her time between essential repairs and secret research. She read Eleanor's diary by flashlight after Emma went to bed, piecing together a narrative that both horrified and fascinated her. Eleanor Sullivan had been a house servant for the Haywood family in the early 1900s. George, the man from the photographs, worked as their groundskeeper. The two had fallen in love, conducting their relationship in whispers and stolen moments. According to the diary, George was Grace's great-great-grandfather, making Eleanor her great-great-grandmother. Samuel must have been their great-grandson, though he'd never spoken of this heritage. But more than romance filled the diary's pages. Eleanor wrote of injustice, of stolen deeds and falsified records, of the Haywoods' systematic appropriation of land from black families after the Civil War. Most intriguing were references to the Silent Room, a secret chamber where the Haywoods kept their most damning records, including the true deeds to properties they'd claimed as their own. At the town library, Grace discovered more pieces of the puzzle. Newspaper archives confirmed that the Haywood family had indeed vanished in 1919. The official story suggested they'd relocated to Europe after financial reversals. But whispers of trouble at the estate and servants fleeing in the night hinted at darker truths. Meanwhile, Emma's friendship with Lily deepened. She reported conversations about life in the early 1900s, sharing details a 12-year-old couldn't possibly know about servants' duties and social customs of the era. Lily showed me where the fancy dresses are stored, Emma said one morning. In a trunk in the attic. She says her mama made them, but the Haywoods never gave her credit. What does Lily look like? Grace asked, increasingly convinced these weren't mere childish fantasies. She's about my age. Brown skin, braids with blue ribbons. She wears a blue dress with little white flowers. She says she died from fever when she was 11, but she stays here to protect the house until the truth comes out. Grace asked if Lily knew about the silent room. Emma nodded solemnly. She says it's behind the big wardrobe upstairs, but we need a special key that's hidden somewhere in the house. Daniel confirmed some of Grace's findings when he came to assess the structural damage. The Haywood disappearance is something of a local legend, he said as they examined the sagging roof. My grandfather worked for a neighboring family. He always said there was more to the story than folks admitted. Have you ever heard of something called the silent room? Grace asked. A strange expression crossed his face. Where did you hear that term? Before she could answer, Emma burst in, eyes bright with excitement. Lily found it. The key. It was in the kitchen fireplace, behind a loose brick. The key, tarnished brass with an intricate bow, was small, clearly meant for a cabinet or strong box, rather than a door. That evening, after Daniel left and Emma was asleep, Grace followed her daughter's directions to an upstairs bedroom dominated by a massive wardrobe. The furniture was too heavy to move, but behind it, she discovered a small keyhole in the wooden panel, nearly invisible unless you knew to look. The key fit perfectly. A section of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow passage similar to the one behind the library bookcase. This one, however, led not down but across, terminating at a heavy iron door secured with a padlock so rusted it broke apart at her touch. The room beyond was small and windowless, its air stale but dry. Metal filing cabinets lined the walls. A large wooden board hung on the far side, covered with papers and photographs. The silent room, Grace whispered. The filing cabinets contained property deeds, originals showing land ownership by freed slaves and their descendants, alongside falsified versions claiming the same property for the Haywoods. Account books detailed decades of theft disguised as business, but the most powerful discovery waited on the wallboard. A large paper banner stretched across the top read, "The night we reclaimed our true names." Below were signatures, dozens of them, alongside photographs of black men and women standing proudly on Willow Creek's porch. These weren't the carefully neutral expressions from the earlier Haywood family portrait. These faces shone with dignity and triumph. At the bottom of the board, two signatures stood out, Eleanor Sullivan and George Sullivan. Grace traced the names with trembling fingers, tears blurring her vision. These weren't just historical figures. They were her ancestors, her blood. They didn't just work here, she whispered. They took it back. The story assembled from the room's documents was extraordinary. In 1919, after years of secret documentation, Eleanor, George, and the other workers confronted the Haywoods with evidence of their crimes. Rather than face exposure and prosecution, the family fled, abandoning the estate. The workers remained, reclaiming their stolen heritage. They established a trust to maintain the property, living and working there as a community until the Great Depression scattered them in search of work in northern cities. The five-pointed star had been their protection symbol, carved around the house to ward off the Haywoods' return and passed down through generations, eventually reaching Samuel's pocket watch. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. An elderly man in an expensive suit stood on their porch, leaning on a silver-handled cane. His face was deeply lined, his eyes cold beneath bushy white eyebrows. Miss Sullivan, I'm William Haywood. His voice carried the cultured accent of old Southern money. I understand you've taken possession of my family home. William claimed the auction had been conducted improperly, that the estate should have reverted to family ownership. He threatened lawsuits, brought in surveyors without permission, and spread rumors in town that Grace was a fortune hunter, desecrating a historic landmark. "That man is desperate to get you out of there," Daniel observed after William confronted Grace publicly outside the hardware store. "Question is, why now? The house has been empty for decades." Martha, the town librarian, provided the answer. County records revealed that William Haywood wasn't who he claimed to be. His birth certificate listed him as William Barton, adopted by distant Haywood relatives at age 10. He wasn't a direct descendant of the original family at all. More significantly, Martha found evidence confirming that the original Haywoods had indeed fled rather than disappeared, abandoning the estate shortly after a confrontation with their workers. Armed with this knowledge, Grace confronted William during his next unwelcome visit, laying out copies of everything found in the silent room. "Mr. Barton," she said quietly, "before you continue your legal threats, you should know what I've discovered." He stared at the documents, face ashen. "Where did you get these?" "From a room your adoptive family tried to seal forever." "The truth doesn't stay buried, though, does it?" The lawyer accompanying William examined the papers, expression growing increasingly alarmed. These appeared to be legitimate historical documents. If authentic, they raised serious questions about the provenance of several Haywood properties, including this estate. William sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 70 years. "You don't understand. This has been my life's work, preserving the Haywood name. A name that isn't even yours," Grace said, not unkindly, "and one built on theft and lies." The negotiations lasted weeks. Further research revealed that William himself was descended not from the Haywoods, but from their former staff. The household manager's grandson, adopted into a distant branch of the family after his parents died. "You're one of us," Grace told him. "Your heritage isn't what you thought, but it's one to be proud of." Gradually, William accepted the truth. He established a scholarship fund for descendants of Willow Creek's workers and helped Grace locate other families connected to the estate's history. With Daniel's expertise and a small army of volunteers, Willow Creek slowly regained its dignity. The hidden passages were preserved but made safe. The silent room became the centerpiece of a small museum documenting both the injustice and the triumph that had occurred within these walls. Emma thrived in her new environment, becoming the youngest tour guide for the weekend visitors. Her friendship with Lily gradually faded, though she insisted the girl hadn't left, but simply doesn't need to stay anymore. They know the truth now. 1 year after their arrival, Grace stood on the restored porch at sunset, watching fireflies rise from the garden. Daniel worked nearby, repairing a section of gingerbread trim, his presence a comfortable constant in her life now. In her pocket, Samuel's watch ticked steadily, restored to life just as she had been. She removed it, studying the five-pointed star on its cover, identical to the protection marks carved throughout the house. "Your father knew," Daniel said, noticing her contemplation. "Maybe not consciously, but some part of him remembered his grandmother's stories about this place." Grace nodded. "He always said we came from stronger roots than we knew." Later that evening, a small gathering assembled in the garden. Descendants of those who had signed the True Names document came from across the country, united by shared heritage and newly discovered connections. William Barton stood among them, humbled by the revelation of his actual lineage, but finally at peace with it. As twilight deepened, Grace lit lanterns along the garden paths. She stood before the assembled group, Eleanor's diary in her hands. 100 years ago, brave men and women reclaimed this place and their identities. They preserved their truth so it would never be forgotten, trusting that someday one of their own would return. She opened the diary to its final entry. "We stay, we endure, we remember, and one day our blood will return to ensure our story lives on." The house loomed behind her, windows glowing with warm light. No longer abandoned, no longer forgotten. Not haunted, but hallowed. Grace thought of the journey that had brought her here, the desperate bid at an auction, the cross-country leap of faith, the whispers and footsteps that had guided rather than frightened, the child's spirit who had helped her daughter connect with their shared past, the symbols of protection that had waited patiently through generations. Some might call it coincidence. Some might call it fate. Grace Sullivan called it coming home. As the gathering dispersed, she remained on the porch, watching stars emerge above ancient oaks. The gentle creak of the swing accompanied her thoughts. From inside came Emma's laughter mingled with Olivia's, the sound of futures being built on reclaimed foundations. Daniel joined her, offering a mug of tea. Their hands touched briefly in the exchange, a small intimacy neither rushed nor avoided. Sometimes, Grace said softly, a house chooses you not because it's haunted, but because it needs healing. She felt the whisper of Eleanor's presence beside her, not a ghost but a continuation. The past and present intertwined like vines on the estate's old brick walls, separate yet inseparable, each strengthening the other. Grace had come to Willow Creek seeking only shelter. She had found her heritage, her purpose, and perhaps, in time, her heart's second chance. The watch in her pocket ticked on, marking not just hours, but generations. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't what's left to you, but what you find when you're brave enough to start again. If you enjoyed this story of discovery and second chances, please like and subscribe. Have you ever felt drawn to a place without knowing why? Share your experience in the comments below.